Click on the subscribe button on the screen to subscribe to our channel. Tune in also for more episodes on Letters I Never Meant to Send.
I didn't expect to notice him like that. I mean, I'm a married woman, and he was my son's college football coach. Big, confident, the kind of presence that filled a room just by walking into it. But there was something more, something quiet about him, too. Like he wasn't trying to be the center of attention, like he didn't need to be. The first time I really looked at him, I was sitting in the stands, waiting for practice to end. It was hot out, one of those late summer days where the sun feels like it's pressing down on your skin. He had a clipboard in his hand and a towel slung around his neck, barking orders with that deep voice of his, but not harsh, more like grounded, controlled. I liked that. He looked over at me, just for a second, just a glance, but I felt it. I felt it in my stomach. The kind of glance you pretend didn't happen, even though it lingers for way too long. Afterward, when the team was dismissed, I walked down to meet my son, and Coach Williams was standing nearby, talking to one of the other parents. He nodded at me. That's all, just a nod. But I swear, it was like the air shifted a little. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, once we were closer. "Good to see you again." I smiled. "You can call me Beth." He smiled back. "All right then, Beth." My name had never sounded like that before. He asked how my son was adjusting to campus life. I told him he was loving it, but I didn't mention how I was the one having trouble letting go. I didn't mention how the house felt too quiet without him, or how I kept waking up early for no reason. I don't know why I didn't. Something about Coach Williams made me want to say more than I should, and nothing at all at once. We didn't talk long, just a few minutes. But when I got in the car, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked me in the eyes when I spoke, like he was really listening, not distracted, not half present the way most people are when they're in a hurry. That night, I found myself scrolling through the team's website. I told myself I was just checking stats. But my fingers hovered when I saw his name. Jamal Williams, former pro athlete, widowed, no kids. I stared at that tiny square photo of him longer than I should have. His smile was polite, formal, nothing like the one he gave me earlier. The next few practices passed without much contact. I waved. He nodded. One day, he walked by as I was getting coffee near the campus gym. He held the door for me and said, "You always here this early?" I laughed and said something forgettable, but the way he stood there, holding that door like he had nowhere better to be, that stayed with me. There wasn't anything going on. I didn't even think of it like that. But something about the way his eyes stayed on mine half a second too long made it hard to ignore how aware of him I was becoming. And then came the day I offered him a ride. It was raining hard after practice, and most of the players had already left. I had stayed late, talking to my son about something trivial, when I saw Coach step outside and look around like he was waiting for someone. He didn't have an umbrella, just a hoodie pulled up over his head, already soaked. "Need a ride?" I asked, half joking. He hesitated, then shrugged. "If you don't mind." That short drive might have been 10 minutes, but it felt like something else. He sat there quietly, big and calm in the passenger seat, water dripping from his sleeves. I turned the heat on. We didn't talk much, just light conversation. But the car felt smaller than it was. When I pulled up outside the building he pointed to, he didn't get out right away. "Thanks," he said, looking at me a little too long again. "Any time." His hand was on the door handle, but he didn't open it. "You've got a calm way about you," he said, eyes still on me. My heart did something strange. I laughed nervously. Most people say I talk too much. He didn't laugh, just smiled. "That's not what I see." Then he stepped out into the rain, shut the door gently behind him, and walked away. I didn't move for a full minute. After that rainy night, I told myself not to read too much into it. It was just a ride, just a comment, just a smile. But it stuck with me in a way that felt different, dangerous even. Not because anything actually happened, but because I kept replaying it, over and over. I started going to more practices than I needed to. My son even joked about it. "Mom, I didn't know you were this into football." I laughed it off, told him I liked supporting him. And I did. But that wasn't the only reason I sat in the stands, pretending to scroll my phone while watching Coach Williams out of the corner of my eye. It's not just that he was attractive, though he was. Tall, broad, smooth, dark skin, and that steady kind of presence that draws your eye without effort. It was the way he carried himself, the way he paid attention when no one else was watching, the way he made even silence feel full. One afternoon, after most of the team had cleared the field, I was walking back toward the parking lot when I heard someone call my name. "Beth." It wasn't loud, but it stopped me. I turned, and there he was, walking toward me, towel around his neck, shirt damp with sweat, clipboard under one arm. "You left this." He handed me a small notebook I hadn't realized I dropped from my bag. "Oh, thanks. I would have lost my head if it wasn't attached." He smiled. "Glad I caught you then." We stood there for a moment, the sun dipping lower behind him, casting everything in that golden light that makes everything look softer, more intimate. "You always stay late?" I asked. He nodded. "Usually. Helps to clear my head." There was a pause, just long enough to feel it. "You're not like the other parents," he said, almost casually. I raised an eyebrow. "Is that a good thing?" He smiled, eyes steady on mine. "It's just a thing, an observation." I could feel the air shift again, like something just beneath the surface was starting to rise. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. My husband. I silenced it quickly and looked back at Jamal. His expression didn't change, but something in the air cooled slightly. "I should go," I said. He nodded once, slow. "Of course." But before I turned away, he added, "Beth." I looked back. "I'm not trying to make anything complicated." That one sentence landed hard, because it already was. The next time we saw each other was at a team dinner for parents and coaches. It was one of those school-sponsored things, awkward and polite, folding chairs and name tags and buffet trays. I wore a black dress that wasn't fancy, but fit me just right. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I wasn't thinking of him when I chose it. But when I saw the way his eyes met mine across the room and lingered, I knew I had been lying to myself. We didn't sit together, of course. That would have been too obvious. But at one point during the night, I slipped away from the crowd to get some air. The hallway outside the event room was quiet, dimly lit. I leaned against the wall, closed my eyes for a second. "Too loud for you too?" His voice, close enough to make me jump. I opened my eyes, and he was right there. Not touching me, not even leaning in, but close enough to feel the weight of him beside me. His presence was like heat, low and steady, filling up every inch of space between us. "I don't really do well in big groups," I admitted. He nodded, arms crossed, gaze forward. "Same." There was a beat of silence, not awkward, more like expectant. "You look good tonight," he said finally, his voice lower than usual. I turned to look at him, unsure how to respond, because I wanted to say something back, something honest. "You shouldn't say things like that," I whispered. He looked at me then, really looked. "I know." And still, he didn't look away. I could feel my pulse everywhere. In my neck, my fingertips, my lips. I didn't move. Neither did he. but it felt like everything had shifted in that narrow hallway. We didn't touch. We didn't even speak again. But when I finally walked away, my legs felt shaky, and the echo of his words followed me back into the noise like a secret only the two of us knew. That night, in bed beside my husband, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking of a man I had no right to think about, wondering what it meant when something hasn't happened, but already feels like too much. It got harder to pretend nothing had changed. After the team dinner, there was this quiet shift between us. Nothing spoken, nothing visible really, but it was there. How he looked at me when we passed each other on the field, how his voice softened just a little when he said my name, how I caught myself checking my reflection before leaving the house. I told myself it was harmless, that as long as nothing happened, I wasn't doing anything wrong. But sometimes, not doing something feels like its own kind of choice. One day, my son forgot his duffel bag. I offered to bring it to campus, and he texted me that he'd be in the gym. When I got there, he wasn't around yet, but Coach Williams was, alone, kneeling by the bench, fixing something on the floor with his sleeves rolled up, forearms flexed. He stood up when he saw me. "Looking for your boy?" "Yeah, he forgot his stuff again." He chuckled. "Teenagers." I walked closer, handed him the bag to hold. Our fingers brushed for half a second. It was nothing, but I felt it everywhere. He looked at me, and neither of us moved. "You okay?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. "I think so." He didn't believe me. I didn't either. We stood there in the quiet gym for a moment too long. "You seem tired," he said. "I haven't been sleeping much." "Your husband?" I blinked. "What about him?" He shrugged, his voice low. "Just wondering if he notices." The question hit harder than I expected. I wasn't sure why, or maybe I was. "No," I said finally. "Not really." The gym was quiet. I could hear the echo of my own voice bounce off the walls. He took a step closer, not enough to close the space, but enough that I noticed. Enough that I felt the warmth of his body and the rise of something else I didn't have a name for. "You deserve to be seen, Beth." I wanted to say something, anything. But the words stuck in my throat. I didn't touch him. I didn't lean in. But I didn't move away either. Then my son walked in, calling for me, and we jumped apart like teenagers caught somewhere we weren't supposed to be. The drive home that day was quiet. My son talked about practice, about upcoming games, about some party the team was planning. I nodded, answered when needed, but I wasn't really there. I kept thinking about what Jamal had said, about how he'd looked at me, like I wasn't invisible, like I was something worth paying attention to. A few days later, my son asked if I could drop off some paperwork with Coach. He'd forgotten to sign something for a scholarship form, and Jamal had offered to meet me after hours in his office so it could be handled quickly. It sounded innocent enough. But I wore lipstick that night. Not bright, just enough to notice. His office was tucked behind the athletic building, small and neat with football memorabilia on the walls and a desk that looked too serious for someone so calm. He opened the door, smiled like he was trying not to. "You didn't have to come all the way here," he said. I didn't mind. He sat behind the desk, and I handed him the papers. Our hands brushed again. Intentional this time, I think. "You look different tonight," he said, eyes drifting to my lips for the briefest second. I laughed lightly. "Do I?" He nodded, pen in hand, not writing a thing. The silence stretched. I sat down across from him, heart beating faster than it should. "I keep thinking about that night at the dinner," he said suddenly. "The hallway." I swallowed. "Me too." There was a pause. We were both waiting for the other to flinch, but neither of us did. I haven't touched you, he said, almost a whisper. I know, but I've thought about it. Me too, I almost said, but I didn't. I just looked at him, every nerve in my body on fire. And then he stood, slow, walking around the desk like he wasn't sure if he was about to stop or take one step too far. He leaned against the edge of the desk, close now. Too close. I didn't move. I couldn't. If I asked you to tell me to stop, would you? My breath caught. His voice was so low I could barely hear it. I looked at him, heart pounding, lips parted, and I wanted to speak, but I didn't know what to say. And then his phone rang. Loud, abrupt, jarring. He didn't move, just let it ring. But whatever spell had wrapped around us started to loosen. I stood up. I should go, I said. He didn't stop me, didn't say a word. But as I opened the door, I heard him behind me. Beth. I looked back. I don't want to hurt you. I nodded, throat tight. You haven't. But maybe I'd already let myself fall too close to the edge. After that night in his office, something shifted. We hadn't touched, hadn't even spoken about it again. But it was all there, humming between us like static in the air. Every time I saw him at practice, or picked up my son, or passed him in the hallway during a parent event, it was there. Unspoken, unresolved, and completely undeniable. I avoided being alone with him, at least for a little while. I kept everything polite, casual. I smiled, asked about the team, complimented his work. I did everything I could to keep the edges neat and tidy, but nothing felt neat anymore. One afternoon, my son sprained his ankle during a game. It wasn't serious, but he was limping, and I rushed down to the field as they helped him to the bench. Jamal was there already, crouched beside him, calm and focused, hands steady on my son's leg. When he looked up at me, I saw something in his face that stopped me cold. Something soft, protective, almost familiar. Afterward, when my son insisted on waiting with his teammates instead of heading home, I lingered near the locker room, unsure why. Jamal came out a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a towel. He's fine, he said before I could ask. Just needs a little rest. I nodded, but I didn't move. He didn't either. Do you want to come sit down for a second? He asked quietly. I knew I shouldn't, but I followed him anyway. We ended up in the back of the building, on a small set of bleachers behind the field house. The sun was low, the sky streaked in soft oranges and pinks. The world felt slowed down. For a while, we didn't say anything. I've been thinking, I finally said. He turned his head toward me, silent. I don't know what we're doing. We're not doing anything, he said, but the words hung in the air like smoke. Even he didn't seem convinced. I mean it, I whispered. I'm married. You're my son's coach. I know how this looks. I know, he said. And still, he didn't move away. I don't want to ruin anything, I said. You haven't. I turned toward him, eyes stinging for reasons I couldn't quite explain. But I think I could. He looked at me for a long moment. So could I. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was quiet, thoughtful, like we were both standing in the same place in our minds, staring at a door neither of us had opened. You make me feel seen, I said, voice barely audible. His eyes softened. You are. That's when he reached out, not to pull me in, not to cross that line, but to gently take my hand. Just that. Fingers sliding into mine like it had always been that simple. It was tender, warm, and somehow more intimate than anything else that could have happened. We sat there, hand in hand, as the sky darkened around us. Not speaking, not moving, just being. And then, after a while, I pulled my hand away, slowly, carefully, like I knew I had to, even if it didn't feel right. I need to go, I said. He nodded. I know. I stood, took a breath, and looked down at him one last time. Thank you. For what? For not making this harder than it already is. He gave me a small smile. You made it easy to feel something again, even if it's not ours to keep. I didn't cry until I got to the car. And when I did, it wasn't because I was sad. It was because I knew something beautiful almost happened. Something full of life and heat and truth. But sometimes, almost is all you get. And that has to be enough. It was never physical. We never crossed that line. But part of me will always wonder how close we came. And part of me will always remember how it felt to almost fall and choose not to.
We're sure you enjoyed this episode. Now like and share this video to your friends and story lovers, and also subscribe to our channel for more of the upcoming episodes.